Let me guess, you learned to read people before you ever really learned to read books. You could tell by the sound of someone closing a door whether tonight was going to be okay, or whether you needed to disappear, shrink, or fix everything before it exploded. You knew the difference between footsteps that meant, "It's safe," and footsteps that meant, "Don't breathe, don't speak, don't be noticed." If that sounds like you, I want you to stay with me, because this isn't just a random psychology talk. This is about the world that got built inside your head when you grew up around toxic people, and why you still feel the things you feel, even now when you tell yourself, "It's over," and "I'm fine." Because it's not just your past, it's the way your brain learned to survive. And honestly, it's not your fault that you're still carrying it. So let's do something different here. Instead of talking about toxic people like some vague, abstract idea, I want you to picture a very specific scene from your childhood. Nothing extreme, just a normal day that somehow didn't feel normal. Maybe you're at the dinner table, maybe in the car on the way back from school, maybe sitting in the living room, pretending to watch TV while your stomach is in knots. Someone makes a harmless comment. Someone else takes it as an attack. The energy in the room changes. Voices tense up. Faces harden. You feel that wave of dread hit your chest, but you don't have words for it yet. Every cell in your body goes, "Here we go." That is where your psychology started being shaped. Not in one big dramatic event, not just in the obvious trauma, but in hundreds and thousands of tiny interactions like that, where your nervous system learned, people are unsafe, love is unpredictable, I'm responsible for things that aren't mine, and I have to manage everyone's emotions or something bad will happen. And if you grew up in that, of course you became the version of yourself you are now. So let's break this down, because if you grew up around toxic people, there are a few invisible rules you were probably forced to live by. And right now, those rules might still be running your life in the background. See if any of these sound familiar. Rule number 1, don't upset them. You don't say what you really think because someone might explode or sulk or punish you with the silent treatment. So as a kid, what did your brain do? It started carefully scanning everything. You watched facial expressions, tone of voice, the way someone walked into a room. You noticed the slightest changes in mood, like your life depended on it. And honestly, back then, it kind of did. Your brain basically became a hypersensitive radar system, always scanning. Is it safe? Are they okay? Did I do something wrong? What do I need to fix? Fast forward to now, and you might still do the same thing. You send a text, and they take longer than usual to reply, and your brain doesn't go, "Oh, they're probably busy." It goes, "What did I do? Did I say something stupid? Are they mad at me?" Someone's quiet in a meeting or in the room, and instantly your body says, "I must be the problem. I did something." That's not you being dramatic. That's a nervous system that spent years learning that other people's moods were dangerous. And that leads us to the second rule you probably lived under. Rule number 2, you are responsible for how they feel. Think about how many times as a child you tried to calm someone down, cheer someone up, explain someone's behavior, justify them, defend them to others, or fix something you didn't even start. Maybe you had a parent who was always angry, or one who was always the victim, or one who would collapse emotionally, and you had to become their therapist at 8 years old. You became the peacekeeper, the mediator, the therapist, the adult in the room, while you were still a child. Psychology has a word for this: parentification. The roles reversed. Instead of them taking care of you emotionally, you had to emotionally take care of them. Now, as an adult, you might feel this constant pull to manage other people's emotions. You apologize when you've done nothing wrong. You over-explain because you're terrified of being misunderstood. You feel guilty for setting the smallest boundary, like saying no or "I'm not available then." You stay in unhealthy relationships way longer than you should because you're scared the other person won't cope if you leave. Not because you're weak, not because you lack self-respect, but because your brain learned early on that your safety was tied to other people's emotional stability. If they were okay, you were safe. If they weren't okay, you were in danger. So you became hyper-responsible for everything and everyone. And all the while, there was another hidden rule. Rule number 3, your needs don't matter. Let's be honest. In a toxic environment, there isn't much space for your needs. If you were sad, it was nothing compared to their problems. If you were angry, you were ungrateful or disrespectful. If you were hurt, you were too sensitive or making a big deal out of nothing. So what did you do? You adapted. You swallowed your emotions. You learned to say, "It's fine," even when it wasn't. You put on a mask because your real feelings never felt welcome. Over time, something subtle but huge happens psychologically. Your sense of self gets blurry. You lose touch with questions like, what do I want? How do I feel? What do I need right now? What do I actually like? Separate from what keeps everyone else happy. And if you notice that, even now, you struggle with basic things like choosing what you want to eat, or what you want to do with your time, or what you want from life, that's not you being indecisive. That's you having spent years learning that what you want is irrelevant. So your brain quietly turned that part of you down, like lowering the volume on a radio station. And yet, there's another layer to this that's really important. If you grew up around toxic people, your brain often didn't just create one coping strategy. It created several. Some kids become fighters. Some become pleasers. Some become invisible. Some become perfectionists. Some become caretakers. Many become a messy, exhausting mix of all of the above. Let's walk through a few of these patterns and see if you recognize yourself in any of them. Maybe you became the people pleaser. You learned that the best way to stay safe was to be as agreeable, helpful, entertaining, or low maintenance as possible. You read the room and instantly knew who needed to be laughed with, who needed to be listened to, and who needed to be soothed. You learned to say yes when everything inside you wanted to say no. You learned to smile when you were dying inside. This is called the fawn response. Instead of fight, flight, or freeze, you fawn. You move towards the threat and try to please it so it doesn't hurt you. Or maybe you became the perfectionist. You noticed that the only time the toxic person in your life was calm or nice was when you achieved something, did something perfectly, or made them look good. So your brain linked being perfect with being safe and being loved. If you got a 98, they asked where the missing 2 marks went. If you did something well, they expected even more next time. If you made a mistake, they used it as proof that you were careless, or stupid, or a disappointment. So now, as an adult, you might experience this constant internal pressure to be flawless. You're terrified of failure, not in a cute, "I just like doing well" way, but in a, "if I fail, I feel like I'm worthless and everyone will abandon me" kind of way. You procrastinate not because you're lazy, but because if you never finish, You never have to see whether it's good enough. On the outside, people might think you're super capable and high functioning. On the inside, you're exhausted and scared. Or maybe you became the ghost. You kept your head down. You made yourself small. You avoided conflict by disappearing emotionally and physically. You stayed in your room, in your mind, in your imagination. You daydreamed a lot as a kid. You were the quiet one, the one people forgot was in the room. Your nervous system's way of surviving was to minimize your presence. If I'm not noticed, I can't be attacked. So now you might struggle to speak up, to occupy space, to believe your voice has weight. You might wait for people to invite you in, but rarely believe you're allowed to show up uninvited. You might be the one who lets conversations be about others because you're so used to disappearing. And then there's another side. Maybe you were forced into the role of the strong one. You grew up around toxic people, and someone had to make sense of it all. You were the one who comforted your siblings. You were the one who knew when to hide. You were the one who saw the truth, even when adults were pretending everything was normal. You were emotionally older than your age. And the hidden cost of that is that you never really got to be a child. So now you're this oddly mature, wise, insightful person on the surface. But there's a part of you inside that still feels very young, very scared, very tired, and very confused that nobody ever came to rescue you. That younger part of you is still there. The part that was overwhelmed, the part that just wanted someone to say, "You're not crazy. This is not normal. This isn't your fault." If you've never heard that clearly before, hear it now. You were not the problem. You were the kid in a dysfunctional system trying to survive in the only ways your brain knew how. Let's talk a bit about how that kind of environment literally shapes your brain and your beliefs about the world, because this isn't just emotional, it's deeply psychological. When you grow up around toxic people, your brain creates a sort of template for what humans are like. If caregivers are unpredictable, controlling, manipulative, cruel, or emotionally absent, your brain quietly stores data like love is inconsistent. People hurt you when you're vulnerable. If someone is nice to me, they probably want something. If I relax, something bad will happen. If I speak up, I'll be punished. If I say no, I'll be abandoned. These beliefs aren't always conscious. You might not walk around thinking them in sentences, but they show up in your reactions. You pull back when someone gets too close. You stay in situations that don't feel good because they feel familiar. You wait for the other shoe to drop when something goes well. You feel on edge doing normal things like resting, saying no, or choosing yourself. That's the psychology of the child, still living in the adult body. Attachment-wise, you may lean towards anxious or avoidant patterns. If your toxic environment made love feel inconsistent, you might cling in relationships now, desperate for reassurance, terrified of being left, constantly reading between the lines, constantly checking if the other person still cares. If your toxic environment made closeness feel dangerous, you might keep people at a distance, never fully letting your guard down, always needing an exit, always ready to detach before they can hurt you. Some people even flip between the two, craving intimacy, but panicking when they get it, sabotaging closeness and then fearing abandonment. And again, this isn't because you're broken. It's because your nervous system is still using an old map to navigate the present. Another big psychological piece is shame. Growing up around toxic people often means growing up around distorted mirrors. You were blamed for things that weren't your fault. You were criticized for existing in perfectly normal ways. You were told, directly or indirectly, that you were too much or not enough or wrong just for being yourself. So instead of thinking, wow, these adults are unhealthy, your child brain did what all child brains do. It blamed itself. Kids turn external chaos into internal shame. If they're mad, it must be me. If they're cold, I must be unlovable. If they're yelling, I must be the problem. That shame can grow into an identity. So now, even when nothing is going wrong, you might carry this background sense of, I am fundamentally bad, or something is wrong with me. You might feel uncomfortable when someone sees you being human, making a mistake, having a need, expressing an emotion. Because deep down, you're expecting rejection or attack. You over-edit yourself in messages. You rehearse conversations in your head. You replay things you said and cringe for days. You feel like you're always on trial. That's shame talking. It was planted in you. It does not belong to you. And I want to say something important here. If you grew up around toxic people, it's very easy to gaslight yourself about your own experiences. Was it really that bad? Other people have it worse. They did feed me and clothe me, so maybe I'm just being ungrateful. Maybe I exaggerated the whole thing in my head. You might see flashes of the reality, the yelling, the manipulation, the emotional blackmail, the name-calling, the guilt trips, the silent treatment, the intimidation, and then instantly pull back and rationalize it away. Why? Because your brain learned another survival strategy. Protect the image of the people you depended on. It is terrifying for a child to fully understand the people I rely on are unsafe. So a lot of kids half know and half don't know. They sense something is terribly wrong, but they minimize, excuse, or normalize it to survive. I deserved it. They were just stressed. They had a rough childhood too. That's just how our family is. As an adult, breaking through that fog can feel like betrayal. Like if you name what happened, you're being disloyal. But you're not betraying anyone by telling the truth about your experience. You're finally choosing to be loyal to yourself. And that's actually where the psychology starts to shift. Because here's the thing, your brain is plastic. It learns. The same way it learned all those patterns to survive, it can slowly learn new patterns to live. But before we even talk about healing, I want to pause and acknowledge something very simple and very real. You survived. That might sound cliché, but think about what that actually means. You survived years of walking on eggshells. You survived never feeling fully safe in the place that was supposed to be your safe base. You survived the confusion of loving people who hurt you. You survived the loneliness of not being believed or not being seen. You survived carrying adult-sized emotional burdens in a child-sized body. You adapted. You endured. You found ways to keep going. Of course, those adaptations left marks. Of course, they show up in your relationships, your work, your self-talk, your habits, your fears. But the fact that you are here, listening, trying to understand yourself, that alone tells me something powerful about you. There is a part of you that never gave up on the idea that life could be different. That's the part of you we're speaking to right now. So, what does it actually look like to gently rewire a brain that grew up in toxicity? Not with some magical instant fix, but in real psychological terms. First, awareness. We're already doing that, putting words to your experiences, seeing the patterns, connecting childhood environments to adult reactions. The moment you go from, "What's wrong with me?" to, "Oh, this is something that started back then," you shift from shame to context. Shame says, "I'm broken." Context says, "This makes sense, given what I went through." And when things make sense, they become workable. Second, permission. Permission to feel what you didn't get to feel when it was actually happening. Maybe you were too busy surviving to actually feel how scary, unfair, or sad it all was. Now, your body might carry that stored tension in anxiety, panic, chronic guilt, or numbness. Giving yourself permission to say, "Yes, that hurt me," or "Yes, I'm angry about that," isn't self-pity. It's self-honesty. That doesn't mean you have to hate anyone. It just means you stop pretending it didn't affect you. Third, boundaries. This is a huge one, especially if your brain was wired to believe that your job in life is to keep toxic people calm and happy. Setting boundaries will feel wrong at first. It might feel mean. It might feel dangerous. It might feel like you're breaking some sacred invisible rule. But psychology-wise, each time you say something like, "I'm not available for that," "I'm not comfortable with how you're speaking to me," "I don't owe you an explanation," "I'm not going to discuss this if you're raising your voice," you are teaching your nervous system a new lesson. I'm allowed to exist without being controlled by someone else's dysfunction. At first, your heart will race. You'll overthink every word. You'll want to apologize immediately afterwards. But every small boundary is a micro rewrite of your internal rulebook. Fourth, choosing safer people. One of the after effects of growing up around toxic people is that red flags can feel weirdly familiar and therefore comfortable. Someone who's unpredictable, selfish, or emotionally unavailable might feel like home, while someone kind and consistent might feel boring or off. The work here is scary but simple. Start listening to how your body feels around people. Who makes you feel tense, small, on edge, or confused? Who makes you question yourself constantly? Who makes you feel like you have to earn your worth? Versus, who makes you feel seen even when you're not performing? Who respects your no? Who apologizes when they're wrong instead of flipping things back on you? Your nervous system might not trust those safe people at first. That's okay. It takes time to believe that a good thing is actually safe, not just the setup for a future hurt. Fifth, often getting support. Therapy, support groups, trauma-informed coaching, or even safe validating friendships can act like a corrective emotional experience. Because when someone sits with you and says, "What happened to you was real, and it matters, and you matter," your brain slowly, painfully, beautifully starts to update. I'm not crazy. I'm not alone. It wasn't my fault. That's not just emotional comfort. It changes how you process future events too. You start to stand up for yourself a little more. You start to catch yourself when you automatically take the blame. You start to notice when you're shrinking yourself to keep someone else comfortable. And you start making different choices. Maybe small at first, like saying, "I actually don't like that," when someone suggests something you don't want. But psychologically, those small moments are massive. Because every time you choose truth over self-erasure, you're stepping out of the child role and into your adult self, the part of you that can now protect the younger you in ways nobody did back then. You can't go back and reparent your past in real time, but you can absolutely parent yourself now. That might look like allowing yourself rest without calling it lazy, feeding yourself instead of skipping meals when you're stressed, speaking kindly to yourself when you make mistakes, letting yourself have preferences without apologizing. These sound basic, but for someone who grew up around toxic people, they're revolutionary because you were trained to abandon yourself. Now, piece by piece, you're learning how not to. I want to leave you with this thought. The psychology of a child who grew up around toxic people is not just a story of damage. It's a story of intense, creative, brutal adaptation. You became hyper-aware because you needed to stay safe. You became emotionally intelligent because you had to decode chaos. You became strong because you had no choice but to hold weight no child should hold. You developed a radar for danger, for lies, for manipulation. Those skills, in a healthier context, can become incredible strengths. Empathy, depth, insight, sensitivity, resilience. The problem was never your sensitivity or your depth. The problem was the environment that punished you for being human. As you move forward, your job isn't to become a completely different person. It's to keep the parts of you that are wise and kind and perceptive, while gradually letting go of the parts that were only ever there to survive other people's toxicity. The hypervigilance that once protected you doesn't have to run your life forever. The people-pleasing that kept you safe doesn't have to dictate your choices now. The shame that was dumped on you doesn't have to be carried one more day. You're allowed to update your story. You're allowed to say, yes, this is where I came from, but it's not where I'm staying. You're allowed to build relationships that feel like calm, not chaos. You're allowed to be loved without having to earn it by suffering. You're allowed to exist without constantly managing everyone else's emotions. If anything in you right now is whispering, maybe I deserve that, listen to it, because that voice, that tiny, stubborn, quiet voice that believes you might be worthy of more, that's you, not the version shaped by fear, not the version shaped by toxic people, you. And if nobody told you this when you were growing up, let me say it clearly. You were a child in a hard situation. You did what you had to do to survive. You are not defined by what they did or didn't give you. You are not broken beyond repair. You are not too late. You are not too much. You are not enough. You are someone whose psychology makes perfect sense given their story. And now, as an adult, you get to decide what happens next. Will the toxic voices from your past keep narrating your life? Or will you start, slowly, gently, imperfectly, to become the one who speaks over your own mind with something truer, kinder, and finally on your side? You don't have to have all the answers today. You don't have to fix everything at once. You just have to keep noticing, keep questioning, and keep choosing yourself in small, real ways. That's how a child who grew up around toxic people becomes an adult who builds something entirely different, not perfect, not painless, but honest, grounded, and finally, genuinely safe. And you deserve that more than you know.